Does this podcast make you happy? Of course it does. That's why you're here. But it only comes out once a week. For happiness every night, you need Adam and Eve. Yes, I'm talking about sex toys. It's cool. You have earbuds in, right? Adam and Eve, America's most trusted source for adult products, has been making people very happy for over 50 years. With thousands of toys for both men and women. Just go to adamandeve.com now and enter code IHEART for 50% off almost any one item. Plus free discreet shipping. That's adamandeve.com, code IHEART for 50% off.
Good morning, everybody. Corey used Bloody History. And if you're listening to this today, you're probably also aware that the alleged JFK files are going to be released today. You all know what I have to say about that. Bullshit. Bullshit. We're going to get 80,000 pages of what they call best known copies. That's what we're going to get. We're going to get 80,000 pages of documents that have been released before that are now just better copies. We've seen this in the past, 2017, 2022, 2023. Same shit, just release better copies. Now, could I be wrong? Sure. They're allegedly releasing 80,000 documents, which is more than they're allegedly holding on to. So who knows what the fuck is going to be in these things. But are we going to get Marguerite Oswald's tax records? No. Social Security records? No. Are we going to get the 986-page file on Marguerite Oswald that's held by Naval Intelligence that goes back to 1941, involves Nazis and New Jersey? Absolutely not. Okay, you see what I'm saying here? Are we going to get Robert Oswald's military records? No. No, we're not. You see, that's the thing. They're going to dump a bunch of stuff that people don't realize that is not what we need. The things that we need to know, the things that are in the documents that we need to have, are things that the vast majority of people will never even think to ask for, like the military records of Lillian Moret. Clearly, she was military. Clearly, she was intelligence. She was flying to Cuba, Canada, military bases in Bermuda. Give me a fucking break. And so was her daughter, Myrtle and Dorothea Moret. We've already talked about her. We're going to end up going over her testimony coming up. We have a lot of Warren Commission testimony to go over. I mean, we'll be on Warren Commission stuff for another year, give or take, right? Possibly forever. And people are obsessing about these new documents. And I'm telling you, you're not going to get... Here's what we might get. We might get some more stuff on Carrie Thornley that people still won't be able to put together. What else? What else might we get? We're definitely going to get a ton of stuff on Cuba and Mexico City, which is all going to be bullshit, all distraction. Remember, you cannot put Lee in Mexico City, period. Because on September the 26th, Lee was in New Orleans, closing out his P.O. box and leaving a forwarding address in Fort Worth at the Payne residence. So there's no possibility that he was in Mexico City. But we have a slew of evidence that the Oswald lookalike, who not only shot Tippit, but went to Mexico City, was Carrie Thornley. Okay? You going to see any documents related to that? No. Nope. None whatsoever. Who knows what you're going to get? I don't have any confidence that any of it's going to be any good or worth it at all. So, let me continue with this testimony of Myrtle Evans. This is the thing. People are going to get all excited over these documents. You need to stick to the fundamentals. Okay? Stick to the basics. And that's what we're doing. We're covering the basics that most people skip right over. Who the hell knows who Myrtle Evans is? Nobody. But we do, right? All right, so let me continue. She's in the middle of her testimony about Lee and his mother, whether or not they came from Texas or from New York. And she indicated to Mr. Jenner, the lawyer for the Warren Commission, that she was under the impression that Marguerite and Lee had come from either Fort Worth or San Antonio. And why San Antonio? Well, I have to look at the dates, but John Pick was in San Antonio on his military stay at some point, and I have to look into when exactly that was. But if John Pick is down in San Antonio and Myrtle Evans believes that she might have come from San Antonio, to say that there's not a connection there would be ridiculous. So, but see, at that time, John Pick was up in New York, where he was stationed in Staten Island, right? And he was stationed at wherever. What the fuck's the Statue of Liberty place? He was there, and then he was transferred to Staten Island. And so, why would she have gone to San Antonio and then John Pick after would have gone to San Antonio, or did they go at the same time? That's a question. And what's the significance there, if there is any at all? I don't know, but she definitely did not go from New York to New Orleans. It's not possible for her to have done that. And it's not possible, number one, because of the 5-month gap, which would indicate she went somewhere, or she moved and stayed in New York for those months. Because when she writes to John Pick in May of 1954, she writes that she just got back to New Orleans and that they had avoided the catastrophe in New York. So that's a slight indicator that she might have been in New York that whole time. But that doesn't make sense either, because Lee's school records end there. But we all know that they fabricated and lied about school records, right? So what is the deal? Why would they have gone anywhere other than New Orleans? And why was it covered up? I don't know. Maybe we can figure it out. So let me continue. Maybe they did come right from New York, but I can't remember that far back. I know that they had divorced, and although no one told me, I just put 2 and 2 together, and it was my opinion that Lee evidently was just so spoiled and demanded so much of his mother's attention that they didn't get along. I mean, her and Ekdahl because of Lee. Now, that's my opinion. Now, here's the problem, right? The problem is, I allege that she went to New York in 1941 or 1942 and lived there, and that's where she met Ekdahl, and that's where she broke up that family because she's a whore and a homewrecker. But this is 1954 we're talking about. We're talking like a decade later. So she couldn't have been talking about that time when she was in New York. She's talking about this most recent time, but they got divorced in 48, and this is 1954. That's, 6 years? So that's wild, right? So she doesn't know what she's talking about. But she admitted she worked for the government at the same time in 41, 42 when Marguerite allegedly, I believe, went into the Navy, where she was a phone operator, not working for the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company. So I'm sorry, I just get such a kick out of that alibi. It's just, to me, it's so ridiculous. It's like saying I didn't work at Boeing, I worked at Lockheed, right? It's just basically what she did. So, all right, let me continue. That's just your surmise. Yes, sir. I can't help feeling that if she had put Lee in a boarding school, she might have hung on to her meal ticket, and considering Mr. Ekdahl's condition and everything, if all that hadn't happened, she would have been sitting on top of the world. She wouldn't have had another worry in her life as far as money goes, but instead her children came first. I mean, Lee, she just poured out all her love on him, it seemed like. Did she ever say anything to you about her experiences in New York City? No. She never said anything to you that would have given you an indication as to whether she had come from New York rather than Texas or vice versa? No, not that I recall, but it's my distinct feeling that she stayed in New York for a while and then moved back to Texas again, and then over to New Orleans. Fort Worth, I think, but I can't say that for sure. Did she say anything to you about any trouble Lee had in school in New York City? No, she never did. But I knew Ekdahl, and I knew he was a man that was set in his ways. He was older than Margie, and he wanted, evidently, a wife. He wanted her to be with him, evidently, and if you've got a kid dragging behind, you know it makes a difference. But now whether that caused the break or not, I do not know. Remember, again, that's 48. We're talking 1954, okay? So they're conflating different things here. The point I'm getting at is she didn't say anything to you about any problems or difficulties she had with Lee in New York City. None whatever. You were aware that she had been in New York City, of course. Yes, but she didn't say anything to you about it. No. Now, at the time, Lee was about 15 years old, is that right? He was somewhere around there, maybe 13 or 14, I don't know exactly. At any rate, you had a period here of several years between the time you saw him and he lived in your apartment with his mother and the time you had previously seen him, so you could compare what he was like and how he acted when you saw him in 1954 as against you when he had seen him before that. Well, I said he was more spoiled than he was when he was younger. He was just a little boy when I first saw him, and this time he was quite grown up, a teenager, like I said. So I would say he's a lot more difficult this time to understand or control than he was when he was younger. The main thing that seems to stand out in his conduct was the way he demanded to be fed, and he would come home from school. Margie would be downstairs maybe talking to me or something, and he would come to the head of the stairs and yell for her to come up and fix him something to eat. He would just stand up there and yell, "Ma, how about fixing me something to eat?" And she would jump up right away and go running upstairs to get something for him. Now, he liked records. He didn't want to see any television, but he would lock himself up in his bedroom sometimes and play these records and listen to the radio and read. He was a hard one to try to figure out, but other than that, he was, I would say, just an average spoiled teenage kid that wanted what he wanted. There were very few of them that aren't that way. Okay, so let's analyze what she's saying here. He would read and he would listen to records, right? This is the Lee Oswald we know, not Harvey Oswald, and I'll tell you why. Because when Harvey Oswald was up in the Bronx in New York, he did nothing but watch TV all day. He didn't read. He didn't listen to records. He watched TV all day long when he skipped school, right? This is not the same person. This is Lee Oswald. This is the real Lee Oswald who interacted with Myrtle Evans, not at 126 Exchange Place, at 1454 and 1452 St. Mary. So, that is an important indicator here. Mr. Jenner then says, would you say he was more spoiled than the average teenager? Well, he was spoiled maybe more because he didn't have a father to pull him down a bit. When you're raising a child alone, it's hard now, with just the mother, because, they're getting bigger all the time and the woman can't keep control over them like a man can. You mean physically? Yes, physically. Did she register him in school here in New Orleans when they came to live in your apartment? Well, I don't know who registered him. That I don't know. But he did go to school? Oh, yes, he went to school. Which school was that? That was Beauregard. And I might say that she used her sister's address so she could get him into that school. That's 7. Is this 737 or 757 French? It's one of those. It's a good school. No, it's not a good school. Okay, that was the bum school in the district. Like, that was where parents didn't want their kids to go. So why did Marguerite Oswald want her kid to go there? It was not a good school. It's a good school, and she wanted him to go there. And also at that time, I believe she was living with her sister, so that was in the school district. That's the way I understand it anyway. I think there has been some confusion about that address that was given at the school, but it is my understanding that that's why she used it. If she hadn't used her sister's address, she couldn't have gone to Beauregard, probably. If she had moved to another district. So since she wanted him in Beauregard, that was the easiest way to do it. In order to get him into Beauregard, she used her sister's address, and that was the reason, as you understood it. Is that right? Yes, that was a good school. I guess it still is, but she wanted him in there. Otherwise, he would have to go to another school. That's Beauregard Junior High School. Is that right? Yes, and like I said, a good school, a very fine school. Was Lee a good student, according to information you received in that regard, if you did receive any such information? Well, I never saw his report cards, but I think he was a pretty good student. I really couldn't tell you that. Did you notice during this period that you had this recent close acquaintanceship with him, that he was still retiring and that he was inclined to be by himself? Yes, he liked books and he liked music, and he would come home from school, of course, a couple of hours before Margie, and he would have crossword puzzles and books and music, and he seemed to entertain himself very well. He didn't go out and play with the other children? No, he didn't. Now, they had this change in 1955 from 1454 to 1452 St. Mary. Was that in the same building? Yes, that was a different apartment then. I'll tell you what happened there. There was this young couple that wanted that apartment, and I still hear from them. She sold them her furniture when they were tenants after her, and she sold some of them the things in the apartment because at the time she told me she was going to take this house way up on the other side of town, and she came back the next day and told me that she changed her mind and wanted her apartment back. But I told her I'd already rented her apartment to this young couple. I said, Margie, what happened to the house you were going to get? And she said, I looked it over and it's too far from a grocery store. I have no way of getting my groceries. Too many blocks to walk and it's too inconvenient. I told her, well, I've already rented the apartment to this young couple. And she said, I wanted to keep my apartment. And I said, but Margie, I've rented the apartment already. And you even sold some of them furniture. She said, well, they can have the furniture. But she said, just tell them you can't let them have the apartment and I've got to keep it. Well, that was sort of how we fell out, was over this deal. I told her, I said, Margie, I can't do that. To tell you the truth, the way Lee was acting up and all, he was very noisy. I didn't particularly want to do it. I knew in the first place that the girl simply couldn't afford it, and it would be just a matter of months until she would be behind in her rent and everything. So how come she can't afford it? All right. She just sold, at the end of 53, the Birchwood house. Okay. She sold the Birchwood house while she was in New York. She should have had a stack of cash. Where's that money? I knew in the first place that the girl simply couldn't afford it, and it would be just a matter of months until she would be behind on her rent and everything. I think she was already about a month in the rears on the rent, and I just figured it would be better if I didn't give her the apartment back. And so I told her that I couldn't do it because I'd already rented it to this couple. I knew that even if she could pay the rent for that month, it would be just a matter of time until she couldn't make it. And she would be struggling all the time and trying to make it. And there would maybe be hard feelings if I let it go on that way. So I decided that it would be better to let it go the way it was going. It seemed to be the best way out of it. I thought we would be better friends if maybe they would go ahead and move now rather than later. So I told her, I said, Margie, if you want, you can move next door and it will be a little cheaper. And so they did move next door. Now I told her that I was going to fix up the little apartment she'd occupied, just to sort of let her down. Have it painted and so forth. If so, she went ahead and moved next door for a while. That was 1452 St. Mary, the place next door. Yes, right next door. You see, I think I have skipped something. I told her I wanted to get the apartment that she had been in fixed up, and that's how I talked her into taking the place next door. But then she started complaining and saying I was charging her too much rent for this place. And in the meantime, Lee'd gotten to the point where he was noisier and more determined with his mother, and it was getting a little unbearable.
Does this podcast make you happy? Of course it does. That's why you're here. But it only comes out once a week. For happiness every night, you need Adam and Eve. Yes, I'm talking about sex toys. It's cool. You have earbuds in, right? Adam and Eve, America's most trusted source for adult products, has been making people very happy for over 50 years. With thousands of toys for both men and women. Just go to adamandeve.com now and enter code IHEART for 50% off almost any one item. Plus free discreet shipping. That's adamandeve.com, code IHEART for 50% off.
What do you mean he was getting more determined? In what respects was he more determined? Well, he would yell, Ma, come up and fix my supper. And he had a loud voice and I could hear him more and more up there. And it got to be quite disturbing, actually. It seemed to be a situation that was getting worse all the time. So I thought maybe it would be better if I didn't have them around. So since the apartment wasn't fixed up anyway, and she wasn't very happy next door, she up and moved. And that's when she went to Exchange Alley. That was in April of 1955. Is that right? Yes. And I never saw her after that. You never saw her again? No, I didn't. You didn't see her at Exchange Alley? No. She never came to visit you? No. She was angry about the apartment because I made her give it up. I mean, I wouldn't give it back to her after she moved away. I don't think she ever got over that. She didn't come to visit you anymore at all? No, she didn't. She didn't get in touch with you at all? No. When was the next time you heard from or heard about Margie or Lee? The next time I heard, they had moved back to Texas. They had left town. Where'd you hear that? Well, her sister Lillian, I saw her in Holmes, or let me see, maybe it was the Fountain Blue at a card party we were having. Yes, I think that was it. She asked me if I'd seen Margie, and I said no, I haven't seen or heard from Margie. And that's when she told me that she had heard Margie had moved back to Texas. I don't know that at all. I heard from several places, several people, that they had seen Margie downtown. She worked at 3 or 4 different places, hosiery and so forth. And someone would run into me every once in a while and that I knew and say they had seen Margie downtown at some store or other, but I didn't see her. And the next thing I knew, she was supposed to be back in Texas. Then I ran into Lillian again later, and she told me this was at the Fountain Blue. Now I have that straight. She told me then that about the trouble Lee was in. Where did you run into Lillian at that time? At a benefit card party at the Fountain Blue. That's right. And what did Lillian tell you about Lee on that occasion? She told me that Lee was in Russia, that Lee had defected to Russia. Is that right? That's when the next thing you heard about anything about the Oswald family. Well, that was Lee came to town and took an apartment on Magazine Street. I can't remember that date now, but Lee got here a day or two before his wife came in. All right, so let me stop right here for a second. So you see how she's being told by Lillian that Lee had defected to Russia. Okay, but Lillian testified she didn't know anything about him going to Russia till after he got back and showed up at her place in summer 63. But she also contradicts that testimony, and that testimony is allegedly contradicted by the photograph of Marilyn and Lillian, and the person we're told is Lee, but I promise you is not Lee Oswald or Harvey Oswald. It's most likely the son of Lillian Moret. He got his arm around her and everything, and Oswald was not affectionate, period. Period. He was cold and withdrawn. So the idea that Oswald would be putting his arm around anybody and laughing like that in a photograph to me is ridiculous. Look at the photograph from the video snap of 1962 Thanksgiving. Look at how Lee is sitting on the couch holding himself. His right leg is crossed over his other leg, and he's in a very close position. His arms are crossed. He's very defensive. He doesn't feel comfortable in this situation around a bunch of people that he barely knows, that he's supposed to be related to, right? So it's very problematic that Lillian told Myrtle Evans that she knew Lee defected to the Soviet Union. That's just a problem. What document are we going to get from the government that's going to clarify that? Are we going to get that one? I'm sorry, but you see what I'm saying about these documents? Like, you're not going to get shit. The shit you're going to get is fluff. You're going to get fluffed like a goddamn porn star. You show me the David Morales files. Any files on Joe Anitas. All the JM Wave guys. You can show me anything on them, I'll be shocked. What else am I going to be shocked about? Show me the military records of Myrtle Evans. Okay, are we going to get the military records of Myrtle Evans? Nope. Nope, for sure not. If somebody wants to go on fucking MyHeritage or Ancestry and see if they can't find military records for Myrtle Evans, I looked. I could only find one potential record that was, and the only reason I connected it to her was because it was under the name Myrtle Evans and it was connected to Julian Evans, who was her husband in New Orleans. There was one. Out of the hundreds and hundreds of records on various Myrtle Evans, I could only find one that was definitively connected to Julian. So what does that tell you? There are no records on her that are public. Why? Take a guess. Come on. Friends with Marguerite and Lillian going back 20 years. Please. And she admitted she worked for the government. Give me a break. We need the records of Myrtle Evans, okay? The military and all personal and CIA and everything for Myrtle Evans. See, people think that CIA spooks or these intelligence spooks are all like super spies. No, they're fucking housewives. They're fucking housewives, right? Who put somebody up in a back room for a couple months or something like that, right? So here, we also have contradictory testimony from Myrtle Evans. It just hit me because Myrtle Evans at one point admits here that she had stayed, Marguerite and Lee had stayed with her at 1910 Britannia for several months. If I'm not mistaken, go back and listen to the previous episode. I think I covered that. But there's a contradiction there as well. And this is the 1910 Britannia address that doesn't show up on any records anywhere except connected to Myrtle Evans. So did Marguerite ever stay at 1910 Britannia? That we need to figure out. Are we going to get a document on that? No. All right. When was it that you took the apartment at 4905 Magazine Street? Was it May 16th? No, I think it was earlier than that, according to our information. Our information? Whose information? Well, whatever that date was, that was the next time I saw him. I don't know if it was April or May or even March. I don't know what date it was, but I got the apartment for him and he moved in on that day he rented it, or the next day, I think. So let me point out something. Again, we have the movement of Oswald from Fort Worth to New Orleans in April-ish, May of 1963. We have the movements of Robert Oswald out of Fort Worth to, where'd he go? Arkansas? At the exact same time. And then what else do we have? We have Carrie Thornley leaving New Orleans and going to Whittier, California in May of 63. Why are all these people fucking fleeing from where they're at in May of 63, April or May of 63? Why is everybody getting the fuck out of town? Well, let me see. If Carrie Thornley is in New Orleans and he's impersonating Oswald in New Orleans, he's got to get the fuck out of town the same time that Oswald goes to New Orleans, right? And it's exactly what happened. It was a virtual flip-flop with probably a mild overlap involving Jones Printing and the stuff that happened there at the end of, when was that? That was August. That was the end of July, beginning of August. So what do we have? We have Carrie Thornley impersonating Oswald in New Orleans. We have Oswald going to New Orleans, probably being briefed by Carrie Thornley and whatnot, connected to whatever people he needed to be connected to there at the time, which I really haven't connected him to anybody except Carrie Thornley and Clay Shaw. And from there, Carrie Thornley will leave. And then when will Carrie Thornley come back? Carrie Thornley will come back September 4th of 1963 to New Orleans. When will Oswald leave? September 26th. So he's there in New Orleans for 2 weeks with him during that September overlap. Okay? Here's another possibility. Carrie Thornley was never in Whittier. Well, he actually was in Whittier because he met with Lauren Hall at one of those fucking right-wing meetings. That's confirmed. So we have a connection there between Carrie Thornley and Lauren Hall. And so Carrie Thornley and Oswald having this 2-week overlap is enough time to be briefed on everything and give Oswald instructions to go back to Dallas. And then Carrie Thornley will go back to Dallas with him, where he will continue the setup of Oswald with Marina, where he's seen at Furniture Mart and, all the stuff in Mexico City and Alice, Texas, right? So it makes perfect sense. But why the hell did Robert Oswald need to get out of Fort Worth at that time? I don't know. Here's another thing. I haven't looked into this. If anybody out there can find a fourth person who moved, not Marina or the kids, obviously, but a fourth person who moved back and forth between Fort Worth and New Orleans between April, May, and September of 1963. Is there a fourth person who moved back and forth while this was all going on? That needs further investigation. Okay, Mr. Jenner says he moved in on 10th. Would that be about right? The day after he rented the apartment. Well, if he rented it on the 9th, then that would be about right. He moved in the day after, I think it was, on the 9th of May. I guess so, yes. That's when I saw him, on the 9th of May, and then he moved in on the 10th. Tell me the circumstances that led to his renting that apartment. Well, the doorbell rang, and my husband hadn't gone to work. He says he recognized him then, but I don't remember it that way. But anyway, this young man was at the door, and he said he wanted an apartment, and did I have an apartment to rent? And I didn't have anything in this building, but I told him there was another building I was fixing up. I told him I might be able to find something for him, and he told me he had a wife and child over in Texas, and that he was going to bring them over here soon as he could find an apartment, and that he had to find something right now. He said, I want something right away. When we were walking down the steps, I looked at him real hard and I didn't recognize him, but something made me ask, I know you, don't I?
Does this podcast make you happy? Of course it does. That's why you're here. But it only comes out once a week. For happiness every night, you need Adam and Eve. Yes, I'm talking about sex toys. It's cool. You have earbuds in, right? Adam and Eve, America's most trusted source for adult products, has been making people very happy for over 50 years. With thousands of toys for both men and women. Just go to adamandeve.com now and enter code IHEART for 50% off almost any one item, plus free discreet shipping. That's adamandeve.com, code IHEART for 50% off.
He said, sure, I'm Lee Oswald. I was just waiting to see when you were going to recognize me. I said, but remember, this is not Lee Oswald. This is Harvey Oswald. I said, Lee Oswald, what are you doing in this country? I thought you were in Russia. I thought you'd given up your American citizenship and gone behind the Iron Curtain. And he said, no. I went over there, he said, but I didn't give up my citizenship. He said he'd been back in the States for quite a while and that he had brought his Russian wife back with him. So I told him I would help him look for a place. So I rang up this friend of mine and I asked her, I said, hey, Vicky, do you happen to know where I can rent an apartment for a young couple with a little baby? And she said, yes, Myrtle, I will take children. This is a little duplex. Okay. So what do we have here now? Now we have a direct connection between Myrtle Evans and the duplex they rented at Magazine Street. So this is getting more suspicious and more suspicious by the minute. Once again, we have a duplex that he didn't rent independently. He didn't just show up there and rent the place. It was connected by Myrtle Evans, who I just got done telling you worked for the government in 1941-42 and probably worked for the military and whose records are not available, right? And so this is the woman who then hooks Oswald and his wife up with this apartment at 4905 Magazine Street, which, if I'm not mistaken, isn't that the address where the backyard photographs were taken and all that stuff? This is another part of this CIA real estate network, period. So there you go. There's your connection. And she says, yes, this is a nice little apartment, and I think they will like it. I said, how much is it? She said $65. And I said, well, he can't spend too much. He's just now getting a job. What's her name? Mrs. Maynard, Vicky Maynard. Okay, so Vicky Maynard, we need the military records of Vicky Maynard, the background on Vicky Maynard, and her complete real estate history. Okay, are we getting that in this document dump? Nope. All right. So do you know her husband's first name? Charlie Maynard. She only saw him for about 15 minutes, and she has no bearing on this. I was trying to exclude her from the conversation. Oh, I see. So she said, Myrtle, bring him over, and I'll see you in about 10 minutes. That was a signal to Mr. Jenner. I guarantee it. I said, we'll come up and see it. So we got in the car and we went up and looked at it. It wasn't too impressive, but it was an upper, and they had no laundry facilities or anything. They did have a little spare room that he could have made into a nursery for the baby, but Lee wasn't satisfied with it after we looked at it. He told me that he would rather get something on the first floor with laundry facilities, having the baby and all. So I said, well, come on, Lee, I don't know anybody that will take children. I just said, but we will ride up and down the streets and see what we can find. So we wrote all about this around Baronne and Napoleon and Louisiana Avenue and Karen Dillette. Okay, so this woman is not the landlord at 4905 Magazine Street, all right, Vicky Maynard. But I don't buy this story at all anymore. Everything about Myrtle Evans is suspicious. So let us continue. Well, come on, Lee. I don't know anybody that'll take children, I said, but we'll ride up and down the street and see what we can find. We began weaving in and out of the streets and looking for any signs of an apartment for rent, and so we finally rode down Magazine Street, and I said, you might as well get as close to your work as possible if you're going to get an apartment. Had you learned in the meantime that he had a job with the Riley Coffee Company? He told me he had a job with Riley Coffee Company and that he wanted his wife to come over here. In fact, he was going to phone her to come over that Saturday, I believe he said. Did he say what kind of job he had with Riley? No, just that he told me he was going to work for the Riley Coffee Company and that he'd been staying at Lillian's and that he was anxious for his wife to come to New Orleans. And he said a friend was going to drive her over here. And so we were coming down Magazine Street. And all of a sudden he said, oh, there's a sign. And I said, good. So I pulled up around the corner and we got up and read the sign. And then we went up and rang the doorbell and they showed us 2 apartments. And this one apartment was very good for the money. It was really the most for our money, I'd say. So I said to Lee, this is a very nice apartment for the money, and you can't afford very much. And I said, this is the best you can do. And I said, if I were you, I would take it. And it had a living room. That was a tremendous room. Larger than this room? Well, no, not quite as wide, but really long. And they had a bedroom here and a kitchen that went this way. In other words, and it had a front screen porch and a yard, and the yard was long, and it had a page fence. What kind of fence is that? A page fence, an iron fence like they used around New Orleans. You may call them storm fences, but down here they're called page fences. Can you see through them? Oh, yes. It's just a child couldn't get in. I mean, they're good fences, but they're not solid. You can see through them. These sort of diagonals, I guess you'd call them. Now, the people ran the place that he rented it. They were from some sort of caretaker. She lived on one side and ran the apartments on the other side that they rented. What was her name, the lady who lived there? Oh, I don't know. I had her phone number and her name, and I was going to call her. And I did call her once that I remember, but nevertheless. So I don't know about you, but I don't know how people forget things like this, right? If I had somebody's name and phone number written down and they were somebody I was supposed to call, someone asked me a year, 2 years later, I think I'd remember the name. There's a lot of selective memory in these testimonies. I think it must have been about a Wednesday or Thursday that we were there. He said it would be the night before they got there because this friend of his wife who talked Russian was going to bring her over to New Orleans and bring the baby bed and bring everything in that way with the extra room and everything that the lady could stay overnight. And that this friend of his wife, so we went and got back in the car and rode home, and I think went out and got some luncheon meat and some things, and I think I ran into the grocery store too and got a pound of ham and stuff, and we sat and ate lunch, and he drank a Coke. I think we talked, and I asked him, I said, well, how does it feel to be back in New Orleans? And he said, I've wanted to move back to New Orleans. He said, New Orleans is my home, and he said, I felt like I just wanted to come back, and he said, I like the high ceilings and the trees and the French Quarter and everything in New Orleans, and he said, in Russia, buildings are brand new. We talked a little bit about Russia, not too much, but he did tell me how many men over in Russia can't rent an apartment if they're not married, that they have to live in rooms, so many men to a room, so that you have to be married to have an apartment. And he said that they were all modern and they are given to you by the government, but that you can only have an apartment if you are married. So we talked some more about Russia and about him giving up his citizenship and things. Tell me what he said about giving up his citizenship. I want to hear all about that. What he told me? Yes. What did he say about defecting to Russia? Anything he said about that? He said he didn't give up his American citizenship. That was ridiculous. He told me that he just wanted to see the country over there and he had gotten work over there and that he had fallen in love with this girl. And we talked about the difference in housing here and there. And he told me that he didn't pay any rent and that they had a modern apartment, I think on the 4th floor. Did he say it was only one room, that there was only one room to this apartment? Well, he said they had a living room, a bedroom, a dining room. Is that what he said? Yes, he said they had a nice place to live over there. He said that. Yes, he told me it was an apartment, and he said he had to live with other men in one room prior to the time he was married. When he said apartment, you assumed he meant several rooms, a bedroom, kitchen, and so forth. Is that right? Yes. But you don't know that, do you, Mrs. Evans? Oh, no, I don't know that. I've never been to Russia. So just to let everybody know, I have a bunch of things that I'm in the process of working on and need to do prior to me getting to my book on Oswald. Unfortunately, all the Russia stuff and everything after is going to have to wait until after I finish my book on Oswald, which you're probably talking at least a year, or if not longer. So unfortunately, we're going to have to stew on what we have until then, because Russia's fascinating to me. There's some shenanigans in Russia for sure, and I'm anxious to get to it, but I can't. I can't do it yet. I've got a solid 7 to 10 years of work ahead of me in this career, right? So Unfortunately, you guys are going to have to wait for Russia, but trust me, it's going to be just as much of a mindfuck as all the Harvey and Lee stuff. If he ever went to Russia at all, or if he even spoke Russian at all, who the fuck knows? This is still a big mystery. But do you remember him distinctly telling you that this apartment had all these rooms? No, I don't remember that. He just said it was a modern apartment. I remember him saying that. It could have just been one room. It could have been one room. Well, like I say, I just don't know. He said it was a modern apartment, but other than that, I don't know what else he said. I mean, whether he described it any more than that or not, or whether I even asked him any more about it. But he did use the word apartment. Is that right? Yes, he said they had an apartment. I remember that very plainly, and he said it was modern, but other than that, I don't know. But he didn't describe the apartment, as far as you can recall. That's right. I don't remember him doing that. And he didn't deny at any time that he had attempted to defect, but that he failed. No, he never did say that. Did he say he had not attempted to defect? Well, he said that he did not want to give up his American citizenship and that he never intended to do so. He said, I'm an American. He said, I just went over there just messing around. Did he express to you then or at any subsequent time his opinion of Russia and his reaction to the life he had in Russia? Well, he didn't seem to think they had treated him too bad. I guess he was just a young man in love with this Russian girl, but he did say now that he had decided not to come back to the United States until he could bring her with him. He did say that, so from that conversation, I gathered that he evidently wanted to come back, but he married into a Russian family and that he had to get out the best way he could. Now, this Russian woman, I don't even know if he was Russian born or not, but the paper said that this woman was a teacher and that she taught Russian. You mean Mrs. Payne? You're talking about Mrs. Payne now. Yes, I didn't even remember her name. You mean the lady that brought Marina over to New Orleans from Texas? Yes, the one that brought Marina and the baby to New Orleans. Well, we'll get into that in a minute, Mrs. Evans. She's not a Russian woman, by the way. She's a girl from Columbus, Ohio that was a Quaker. Is that right? Yes. Well, she did speak Russian, and she was the lady friend of Marina that was going to bring Marina and the baby to New Orleans. Well, that's right. Does she speak Russian? He told me that his wife didn't speak American. Did he say why she didn't speak English? Why she didn't? Yes. Did he give you any reason for that? Why she wasn't learning the English language since she was living over there? Kind of funny that less than a year after the assassination, Marina testified in full English at the Warren Commission. So, lying bitch. What impression did you have of Lee as of that visit, Mrs. Evans? Because you were with him for quite a while there on this apartment hunting tour. What did you think of Lee? Well, he was, I would say, sort of arrogant. He seemed to think of himself as being sort of apart from everybody else, and he carried himself so straight in the way he avoided people and keeping within himself and, not talking too much. I noticed all that. I asked him how his mother was, and he said his mother was fine, and I asked about his brothers because his brothers were both in Texas, and I believe one of them has a child or two or something like that, and he said as far as he knew, they were all right. We were just sort of talking, you might say, on the surface. How you do ride along, and all the time you spent time looking for something. We were looking for an apartment sign, and we were getting out and looking and getting back in and just driving around looking and talking about things in general. Now, you use the expression arrogant. What did you mean by that? Well, I don't know. Just the way he talked and walked around, I guess. I don't know what gives you that feeling when you're around somebody like that. He was just different. Do you think he considered himself superior to anybody else or his fellow Americans or anything like that? Well, I wouldn't say he acted like he was superior to anybody. He acted normal in that respect, I guess. He talked about Russia, and he talked about the way they lived, and then he said, it's good to be back in the United States. And he said he would have come back before if it had not been for this Russian girl that he married. He said he'd been in Texas 8 months then. I said, well, that made you come back to New Orleans? And he said, well, this is my home, and I wanted to see my family.
Does this podcast make you happy? Of course it does. That's why you're here. But it only comes out once a week. For happiness every night, you need Adam and Eve. Yes, I'm talking about sex toys. It's cool. You have earbuds in, right? Adam and Eve, America's most trusted source for adult products, has been making people very happy for over 50 years. With thousands of toys for both men and women. Just go to adamandeve.com now and enter code IHEART for 50% off almost any one item. Plus free discreet shipping. That's adamandeve.com, code IHEART for 50% off.
The Oswald family. Yes, he said he wanted to see if he could locate any of his family and that he didn't know who any of them were anymore. Did he say anything at all as to whether he was happy or unhappy in Russia? No, he didn't say anything about that, except he would have to come back sooner if he hadn't married this girl and had to wait until he could bring her out of the country. Did he say anything about having been in the service? No. He didn't say anything about that, but I found that out. Did he say anything about what his ambitions were, what his objectives were in life, and now that he was back home? No. Did he have any luggage with him? Not when he came to my house. He said he'd been staying at his aunt's. Did he talk about any of his old friends? No. When he was a teenager, did he ever smoke? No. Did you ever know him to smoke? No. Or drink? No. Would you say he was temperate with respect to smoking? No, he was a very deep boy who liked to dig into things, and he liked music and books. Would you say he was a voracious reader? Yes, he liked to read, and he liked to listen to the radio. What kind of music drew his attention? Classics? Well, symphony more than the highbrow stuff, I guess you would say. I don't really remember because this was so many years ago, and I didn't go up to their apartment that much. She would come down to my apartment. Who would? His mother, but I know he liked to listen to his records a lot, and he had a lot of books all over the place. His mother would come downstairs in the evening sometime, and we would sit and talk, and sometimes even when she would just come in from work, she would have a dinner with me or something like that, and that's the way it was with Margie and me until he had this sort of falling out, I guess you would call it. Then after they moved to Texas, like I said, I didn't hear from them for quite a while. And then Lee came back and came to the house, and we did all that apartment hunting until we found one. And then after that, he moved in, and he called one day and wanted to know if I could come up and meet Marina. So how long was this after he moved into the apartment? Can you remember? Oh, I'd say a week or so. Anyway, I thought it would be nice to go up and meet Marina, and I told him we would try to come up because I would like to meet his wife. And he said, just come anytime. He said she was anxious to meet me. Well, of course, I was busy, so I didn't go. So one night, while we were sitting and looking at television here, his face comes glaring on the television screen, and he'd been arrested for passing out some kind of handbills or something, and it told about the scuffle over a Cuban thing. Let me interrupt you there for a minute now. That's the first you ever heard or the knowledge that you had Lee Oswald was mixed up in any sort of way with this activity. Is that right? Oh, yes. I had no idea that he was mixed up in anything like this, and I was shocked when I saw his face on the screen passing out these handbills in connection with this Cuban thing. And so I told my husband, well, they said he went to Russia to give up his American citizenship. Well, maybe he has. I said, I'm certainly not going up there now. So I didn't go, and I don't know whether this was before that or after that, but I called up the lady that had rented the apartment to them. I had asked her for her phone number at the time, and I told her at the time that I would try to send her some tenants. So she did give me the number. So I called one time to see how the Oswalds were getting along. Evidently, this must have been after that. I don't remember. So anyway, I called and said, would that have been Mrs. Garner? Yes, that's right. Garner, I told her. I said, this is Myrtle Evans, who helped Lee Oswald get the apartment. How are the Oswalds getting along? And she said, they're a queer kind of people. And she just said, I told them that after all, how do you expect your wife and your child to speak English language when all you ever do is talk to them in Russian? She said, I told him, this girl doesn't know a word of English, and I can't converse with her at all. And she said, I asked him why he didn't talk to her in English and let her learn some English so that she can talk to people that live in this country instead of always in Russian. What did she say when she said that? Well, she said he didn't say anything. She said she tried to help them in different ways, but they didn't want her help, and that girl couldn't talk a word of English, so she couldn't understand her anyway. She said that Lee had, for some reason, always talked to her in Russian, and she said she told him she will never learn to speak English if you keep talking to her in Russian. Now, that must have been prior to the time that I saw Lee on the television, that he had killed the president, and that the rest of the world, and the rest of it, I didn't even know he was back in Texas. I thought he was still living on Magazine Street, working at the Riley Coffee Company. You didn't know he was back in Texas? No, because I never did go back. And when I saw this flash about the Cuban situation on TV and Lee's picture all over the screen, I said, if he's in Russia, if he is Russian, I don't want to get dragged into it. Maybe they will think I had something to do with it. So you just stayed away. Is that right? That's right. I didn't want to take a chance in getting involved in anything like that. However, I'll say this. I would have loved to have met Marina. Maybe you can call it curiosity or something, but I did want to meet her. She seems to be a lovely person. I couldn't tell you where she lived in Texas. I never heard from them anymore after that. I would have liked to tell his mother how sorry I felt for the loss of her son and things like that, but I just don't know how to go about something like that now. I guess it's just one of those things, but I sure do feel sorry for her. Tell me this, in the time that you knew Lee Oswald, did he pretty much get his own way? Would you be able to say that? Well, I would say he did, definitely. She would try to give him everything he wanted so that she could. I mean, and you do everything he wanted and that he wanted to do to her. I've seen that happen many times in the time that I knew them, and especially while they lived at my house. I mean, she couldn't give him a lot of material things. She just didn't have much, and she would try to pacify him. That boy was so inclined to be within himself that it was hard to figure out. I guess no one will be able to tell what was really in his mind. They called him a loner, and I guess that's about the best description you can give him. He's certainly a quiet type boy. What did you observe with respect to his relations with other children? Just how did he regard them? Well, to be truthful with you, I never really saw him with anyone except his mother practically. Do you recall when you had a discussion with Marguerite with respect to her leaving Lee with a couple? Oh yes, Marguerite told me that she had this couple at her home looking after Lee. He wasn't 3 at the time. You see, him was talking about the roaches. And so he wasn't old enough to be put in a nursery. But then the neighbors began telling her that they were cruel to the child when she wasn't home and that the child was doing a lot of crying. And so she came home from work early one day and she said her baby was screaming and he had welts on his legs and that this man had beat her baby. And so she put them out that night. Now, who were they or what were their names? I don't know. But she said that no one would take Lee. And she just didn't know what to do with him while she was working. So that's why she got this couple in the first place. Why wouldn't anybody take Lee? Well, I mean, she couldn't put him in a home. He was too young. Because he's too young, that's right. The older boys could be in the home. In fact, of course, they were. But Lee was not 3 years old, and they have to be 3 before the home will take them. She didn't want to go to the welfare because once welfare gets in the case and gets a hold of a child, you have nothing but red tape and everything. And sometimes you have a hard time getting your child back. And so she didn't want to fool with them. And yet you couldn't put him in the home. And so she said there was nothing else for her to do but try to get somebody to take care of him, which she did. With what money? If she's broke. And she was sorry that she ever did that. You say Lee denied to you during your discussion with him that he ever tried to give up his American citizenship. He's changing the subject again. Yes, he said that he never intended to do that, but he just wanted to see the country over in Russia and see how they live and how the country looks. And so he went into Russia and got a job there and was working. And then he met this girl and they got married, and he told me he would have been back sooner if he'd figured out some way to get her out of the country. Actually, he didn't seem to want to talk too much about it, and I didn't try to pump him too much. But I was curious to see if he had any change of mind and what actually happened. I do feel that he was sympathetic with the communist system of government, of the Russian system, but now I was only with him a few hours, but we generally talked about his mother and his brothers and his job and looking for an apartment, and he didn't even tell me at the time that his wife was expecting another baby. I was surprised when I heard that. What did he say about his brothers and mother? Well, he said the boys were in Texas, and I think Robert, or one of them, had a couple of children. I think that was Robert that had a couple of children, and we just talked generally about things like that, Did you get the impression that he was patriotic toward the United States? Or what kind of an impression did you get in talking to Lee? Well, like I said, he seemed to be sympathetic towards Russia, but he told me that he was glad to be back in the U.S. and that only reason he was in Russia working at all was because he had married this Russian girl and wanted to get her out of the country, or he would have been back sooner. Did he say anything about having served in the Marines? Anything about how he felt about that service, or did you know he was in the Marines? Well, I sort of halfway knew about it, maybe from his aunt. I don't know. I don't remember if Lee mentioned that fact in our discussion that day. I don't really remember it. I do know that he always wanted to go to the Marines. He always wanted to go into the Marines. Yes, he did. Tell me about that. How do you know about that? Well, because when he was going to Beauregard, he wanted to be a Marine. He expressed that to you. Yes, he always wanted to be a Marine. He often said that. Do you recall a period of time when he wasn't in high school, but he still lived there? You mean in my apartment? Yes. No, because they moved from my house and I lost contact with them. But while they were living in your apartment, did he actually express a desire to go into the Marines? Yes, he was always ambitious to be a Marine as far as I knew. Did he ever express a desire to be like his brother, since it wound up they were both in the Marines? Well, yes, I think he wanted to be like his brothers. They were both in the service, I think John was a Marine, but I can't remember what branch of the service Robert was in. Well, John was in the Coast Guard, I think. Well, the Coast Guard, and so Robert must have been in the Marines. That's right. As long as I've ever known Lee, he was wanted to be in the Marines. That's one of the things he said he always wanted to do. Did you learn anything as to the mother's attitude in that respect, about her boys going in the service, and particularly Lee? No, but Margie was satisfied that her children were going into the service because she didn't have the money to send them to college so they could graduate and all that stuff. So it was natural that they would go into the service after they got out of high school. Did you ever meet Mrs. Payne? No. You mean the lady who brought Marina to New Orleans? Yes. No, because I never even met his wife. I never went there at all. He called me, like I said, and told me that his wife had come to New Orleans, and he said he would like for me to come up and visit them and meet her. And I said, Lee, I'm going to try to come. And I said, you all come to see us. And he said, come just any time. He said Marina was anxious to meet me and to come up and visit them anytime. I have no further questions, but I'd like to ask you this general question, Mrs. Evans. Does anything occur to you that might be helpful to the commission that I haven't asked you about, either because I neglected to do so or because I haven't learned about it? If you can think of anything, I will appreciate if you'll tell me at this time any incident or occurrence that took place during the time that you knew the Oswalds. No, I can't think of anything else. Would you say his character, and I'm talking about Lee now, would you say it was strong or weak or what? For example, did he give way quickly to anger, or on the contrary, was he a man of self-control? Well, he could get away angry with his mother. That was when he was in his teens, of course, the way he would holler at her when he wanted to eat or something like that. And when he would holler, she would jump up and practically run to do whatever he wanted her to do. Of course, I don't know anything about his manhood because I was only in his company about 3 or 4 hours then. Would you say he was pleasant and inviting individual with whom you yourself would seek to be in his presence or be with him, or just what sort of emotions did he generally display? That's what I'm getting at. Well, he didn't laugh too much, and he wasn't a light type of person. He was what I call deep. He wasn't real friendly. To like him, you would have to know him. I mean, even as a child, you weren't too warm to him because he was very quiet and deep, and of course, I didn't have too much contact with him. Most of my contact was with his mother. All right, Mrs. Evans, I appreciate very much your coming in and giving me all this information, and I know it will be helpful to the commission in its evaluation. All right, and then they go over the preamble stuff, the postamble, right? So you got to sign your thing and whatnot, and so. But that wraps it up. You know, her testimony, for nothing else, goes to the character development of Oswald when he was living there back in 54 to 55, May 54 to May 55. And remember, we've got the postmarked address envelope from November of 54 from 126 Exchange Place, right? They did the swapperoo there. Harvey and his mother, Harvey and the fake Marguerite, left there, went to go to Fort Worth, where he went to Stripling. And at that time, Lee Oswald and his mother moved in their place. So normally I'd probably do the testimony of Julian Evans next because it's right here. But I'm going to look into, I forget the name of the woman who was a witness to the test and testified before the Warren Commission, who was the neighbor of Oswald at 126 Exchange Place. But we're probably going to get to that next. Before getting to, we still have Julian Evans, Marguerite Oswald, Marina Oswald. We have a lot of testimony to get through. So, and keep an eye out for these documents. They might have dropped, while we were doing this show. We'll see. But that's going to do it for me today, guys. I'll be back whenever.
Does this podcast make you happy? Of course it does. That's why you're here. But it only comes out once a week. For happiness every night, you need Adam and Eve. Yes, I'm talking about sex toys. It's cool. It's cool. You have earbuds in, right? Adam and Eve, America's most trusted source for adult products, has been making people very happy for over 50 years. With thousands of toys for both men and women. Just go to adamandeve.com now and enter code IHEART for 50% off almost any one item. Plus free discreet shipping. That's adamandeve.com, code IHEART for 50% off.